Hi there. Not so long ago I did a video about 12 novels that have inspired me. And when I got to the end of producing that video, I thought of several more novels that I'd left out. So I promised that I would do another video with 12 more books that I've loved or that have inspired me. So here it is, 12 more novels that have inspired me. I hope you enjoy it. So, as before, I'm starting with a children's novel, and it's Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. This was definitely one of my childhood favourites. I still have the copy my aunt bought for me one Christmas, and I became completely engrossed in it. My favourite chapters were the Wildwood and the Piper at the Gates of Dawn. These chapters had a real magical quality about them for me that really appealed to me. Another of my favourite children's novels, and possibly the one that inspired my love of dogs, was 101 Dalmatians by Dodie Smith. I suppose you could call it a thriller story for dogs and dog lovers. And it has one of the most iconic villains in children's literature, Cruella de Vil. The original animated Disney film was great too. I went on to read two more in this series, Twilight Barking and Starlight Barking, both of which I loved. Dodie Smith also wrote adult novels, and I have to mention I Capture the Castle here, which is another great read. My next children's novel is his Dark Materials, it's a trilogy, his Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. I read this trilogy when it came out, and at the time I was writing my own children's novel inspired by the works of C.S. Lewis. Well, these books by Pullman were in a different league altogether, incredibly sophisticated and so full of depth and detail. And to be honest, I nearly gave up writing my own novel as it seemed such small fry in contrast to this unique and extraordinarily imaginative epic fantasy tale. In fact, it's now more classed as an adult story as well as a children's one. In 2019, I had the privilege to meet Philip Pullman and tell him what a fan I was. An opportunity not many of us get. And by the way, I did finish that novel in the end. My next book is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Like most girls, I read this when I was very young and absolutely loved it. My favourite character, of course, was Jo, the tomboy and writer, because I related to her more than the other girls. I think this book is so popular because it has a reality about it. It has all the ups and downs and tragedies of normal life. It doesn't matter that it was set in 19th century America. The hopes, fears, trivialities and disasters of everyday life are timeless. And this novel is timeless. Next on my list is Dracula by Bram Stoker. Now, most of us have seen at least one Dracula or vampire-themed film, but how many of us have read the original book? I only got to read this a few years ago, as it was on a science fiction and fantasy course I was enrolled in, and I absolutely loved it. It's dark and chilling, but with that underlying hint of sexuality and seduction that makes it so enticing. And it's a unique gothic classic of its time. If you love vampire films and stories, you really should read the original and best of them all. I have to include Jane Austen on this list because I love all her books, and Pride and Prejudice is probably the best, although my first introduction to Austen was Emma, which my aunt bought me for when I was a teenager, and I've always had a soft spot for. Austen had an extraordinary ability to observe the society and characters around her and to put these onto the page in a witty and amusing way, whilst exploring the mix of flaws and virtues of her main characters. I think Jane Austen is so much a part of our literary consciousness that it is sometimes easy to forget that she was writing at a time when women weren't supposed to be writers, which makes her collection of works so extraordinary and so tragic that she died so young, and we only have those 6 iconic novels. Next is Birdsong by Sebastian Faulks. I read this a few years ago and was deeply affected by it. Set partly during the First World War and partly in the 1970s, it is poignant and moving, exploring the effects of trauma on the human psyche. The account of the first day of the Battle of the Somme is some of the best writing I've ever read, and it moved me to tears. The subject matter makes it difficult reading at times, but it is an important book which accurately depicts the horror and human cost of war. One writer that I've always really enjoyed is Mary Stewart, and I've chosen her thriller Madam Will You Talk. She's not a novelist you hear much about these days, and is probably a little old-fashioned for today's reader. Her books mostly published in the 1950s and 60s. I discovered her novels in the 1980s, starting with this one, and I could not get enough of them. Every time I visited a second-hand bookshop, I would look out for a Mary Stewart novel until I had the full collection. I would call them intelligent romantic thrillers, and they're darn good stories, which I always found difficult to put down. Titus Grown by Mervyn Peake. The first in the Gormenghast trilogy. I was completely blown away when I read this book. I had read fantasy novels before, but this was something else again. It is a work of extraordinary imagination, with dark, eccentric and complex characters, and a setting that is huge and rambling whilst maintaining a claustrophobic, stifling atmosphere. The style is darkly gothic, dystopian and weird. The category of gothic fantasy is not quite enough to contain this novel, which is really in a league of its own. If you like fantasy, you have to read this, the best rival to Tolkien that I know of. And next we have Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. Obviously, I love historical novels, and I could list several novelists I've enjoyed, but Hilary Mantel has a very unique voice, and her ability to get inside her main character, in this case Thomas Cromwell, was quite amazing. History has not painted Cromwell as a sympathetic character, but Mantel has been able to put a new perspective on this man. Flawed and ambitious, yes, but also a tragic family man, having to tread the dangerous path of being Henry VIII's right-hand man, whilst maintaining some sort of integrity. The style of writing does take a little getting used to, but once you get into this novel, and the books that follow, it is difficult to put down. I wanted to put another classical novel on this list, and while there are several to choose from, I could have gone for Tolstoy or Dostoevsky or Mrs. Gaskell. I've gone for The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. While he's not quite as popular as Charles Dickens, in many ways he is an easier read. And I really did enjoy this satire about corruption, greed and dishonesty in society and politics. These are timeless subjects that will resonate for many of us today. And finally, I have Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I've read all of du Maurier's books and loved them all, but this is probably the favourite. The famous opening line is a complete hook, and draws you into this incredibly atmospheric, psychological and dark tale of love, jealousy and murder. And the setting, of course, is the dramatic backdrop of the rugged Cornish coastline. What's not to love about this book? So there you have it, 12 more books from my lifetime reading list. I'd be happy to hear what your favourite novels are and why. Drop me a line in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos on books and my own writing life. Bye for now.